Hey, so it's the new year, and the Tumblr, kind of doing what it's doing. I am finally in a place where I feel like I want to put out or re-put out some of my phalloplasty experience in a more public area. Um, I'm still active in one of the secret groups, but uh, you have to be at least some kind of on some kind of journey already to be in there. So here we are. Kind of reason I left was a lot of complications that I came up with. That took a lot of time, a lot of energy. Um, had a group that I made on Facebook, and between finding out that there were minors in there, finding out and having to deal with some of the way people address surgeons when there's complications, and just the energy of maintaining it, I ended up taking it down. I had videos up on here before, but for similar reasons and not wanting to deal with things, I took them down. So I figured I would kind of go back to it. Hopefully YouTube's around for a while. I don't really know where else to put things that I would like, and at least probably regularly update. So to start out, I had surgery with Dr. Gottlieb at the University of Chicago Medical Center. My urologist was Dr. Ferris, although I've had surgery with Dr. Ferris and the urologist who usually works with, Dr. Bales. How did I pick my surgeon? So I consulted with Dr. Crane, Dr. Chen, and Dr. Gottlieb. The first surgeon I consulted with was Dr. Crane. I thought he was a nice person. I would not recommend him unless you have some knowledge about how to deal with medical things, what is normal, what is not normal, are willing to advocate very strongly about your needs, and have strong follow-up care locally or around. Um, just when I talked to him, especially comparatively, he really glossed over complications. When talking about donor sites, really felt like he wasn't super forthright on what to expect. And just an example, it was when Chen was still with Brownstein and Crane. When I was consulting with him, the complication rate between ALT and RFF for the urethra, Crane gave me 15%, which was also bad, a very bad guesstimate about complication rates. And Chen gave me an answer of about 50%, which is far more accurate. And I'm still a little upset about that because it turned what could have been a 4 or 5 month process into a year and a half-ish year process of getting a date and everything. So I had my consult with him, and at the end of it, was told I would have about a month wait until I got my surgery date. So at about a month, I contacted the office, didn't hear back. Contacted the office at a month and a half, finally heard back with no answers. Contacted the office again at 2 months. And by that point, I started to get really, really upset. And so I scheduled a consult with Dr. Gottlieb because I really like the way he does his glands. He doesn't do a VY scrotoplasty, which to me, on the list of things I cared about, scrotoplasty technique was very low. And also, if I had to pick one, I'd go with a fused scrotum over a VY scrotoplasty anyway. The reason being, the more incisions you have, the more likely you are to lose sensation somewhere. Just more cuts, more opportunities to hit something. Nothing about surgeon choice, technique, or whatever. It has inherently more risk. So he does a fused scrotoplasty, which I didn't really care about, but his glands was something I really liked. It also seemed that he made formed phalloplasties a little bigger than what Dr. Crane was doing. Also something Crane said he could almost guarantee about 5.5 inches for formed phalloplasty. which with the way that they take the flap was seemed like it was a bad estimate. So had that happen, set up a consult with Dr. Gottlieb, consulted with Dr. Gottlieb. I really appreciated how honest he was about complications he's had, complications that could arise, reason he switched the staging of surgery. I thought at the time his personality could that it left something to be desired. I didn't think he was mean, didn't think anything like that, but it was definitely a lot colder than I felt. It was definitely colder than Dr. Crane's personality. So I had that. Gottlieb requires, for the most part, that you see a very specific psychologist in Chicago. And so I was thinking about setting that up when something came up, and I wasn't 100% about whether he would still be practicing anymore or not. So I took a date with Dr. Chen because it was when the practice was switching, when Crane was going to be in Texas. So took the date with Dr. Chen. Did not feel good about donor sites. So a couple months before my surgery date, I was about to fly out to San Francisco for another in-person consultation, but this time with Chen. And I saw that Gottlieb was practicing again. So I left for for San Francisco, and the day I had my consult with Chen, I also scheduled a follow-up consult with Gottlieb in Chicago. So had the consultation with Chen, really liked Dr. Chen. I think he's a great surgeon. He was honest about expectations. When I was asking about size, expectations, and such, that's when I was like, oh crap, I started feeling really, really bad, really, really nervous, anxious about kind of surgeon choice, donor sites, everything. I was a mess because I kept looking at other surgeons. I just did not feel right. But for my forearm, he said, as an estimate, I could expect 4.5, maybe 5 inches of length, and that I would have a fairly thin penis. That's not something I wanted to hear. My ideal size was at the time between 6.5 and 6 and 6.5. If I had to go over and restart again, I'd probably, knowing that shrinkage and stuff can happen, would probably try to go for 6.5 to 7. So that number was very bad for me. And then with ALT, I could probably get the length that I wanted, but the girth would be between 7 and 8 inches, which at the time seemed really, really awful. I have now a 6.5 inch girth penis. At times I've had an 8 inches of girth. 8 inches of girth for me was too big. I think 6.5 is really great. I really like what I have. So I consulted with Gottlieb again, decided that he was the guy I was going to go to because with length, and I told him what I wanted. He said they usually try to go for between 5 and 6, and that made me feel better. And it seemed that he listened to me about what I wanted and stuff like that. So I decided to go with him. Had my first stage, which was the vaginectomy, urethral lengthening to the tip of my natal genitals, and some kind of scrotal work that I can't remember that didn't really look a whole lot different. And that went really well. I didn't really have any complications. I had a rough time coming out of anesthesia with that one, had a massive migraine, caused me to have a really bad panic attack, but it was fine. I had some pain post-op that I ended up in the ER for from the catheter. At the time, I didn't know what it was. Looking back on it, it was probably just a really bad bladder spasm. So, had that. The result of that surgery, I could pee standing up. It did take a little bit of adjustment. I didn't have to drop my pants all the way. I could just kind of lower everything. Used urinals one night when I was drunk at a pizza place, and ever since then, from when I had surgery, I always stood to pee. So, um, that happened. Second stage, I had that July of 2017. October of 2017, I had form phalloplasty using my dominant arm, um, the urethral lengthening glandoplasty. Um, that went almost as bad as it could have gone. So I started having complications in the OR. And before I get into this, something I think needs to be said is that the complications I had were not the result of surgical error. In the time, it didn't seem like that. I've talked to people who are in the medical profession. They don't think it was. In fact, with the complications I've had, I'm pretty lucky to have gone out of that how I did. I still go to my surgeon. I like him. I do not regret going with him. Um, and all of the complications that I had, I was told could happen. I think there is a very big disconnect going into surgery between what could happen and what is the expectation, especially given my health and my age. But so in the OR, my skin graft leg, I had a split thickness graft taken from my leg to put on my arm, would not clot. So it just kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding a significant amount. I required several transfusions between the day I had surgery and about 3 or 4 days later. So I had that happen in the OR. I woke up from surgery, was fine. First couple days, everything was actually going pretty well. My arm was healing really well. And then on the fourth night, it was actually when they were thinking about maybe moving me down to a regular floor. They came in, were checking kind of the pulse and the color and the temperature of my penis. My right side was a little bluer and a little colder, not significantly, so it's not something that would be really obvious, but it's enough where one nurse checked it, got another nurse who confirmed it, and the way it happened, Gottlieb just came in to do rounds, and so I was his first person. He came in, checked it, was like, you need to go to the OR so we can see what's wrong. And within an hour, I was in the OR, taken down and everything. So that happened. I had a venous congestion, so lots of blood was going into my penis, but not enough was coming out, and it was causing some issues. The way that they resolved that, they put little silicone strips in, and it allowed blood to just kind of drain out, not through the vascular system, just out through holes in my penis, basically. So that happened. It led to necrosis and tissue death. At about almost 2 weeks post-op, everything was going well. I still had a lot of wound care because there was stuff sloughing off of my penis, which was to be expected. They told me to expect that, and I had wound care to do with it. So I was discharged at about 2 weeks post-op. I think it was either 12 or 13 days post-op. I was discharged, and about 2 weeks after that, or no, about a week after that, or 2 weeks after that, long time ago. Can't remember the exact timeline. I went in for my post-op, and we were actually planning to head back to Ohio that week. And I go in, and he's like, so, when are we planning on leaving? On Friday. No, you're not. It was actually the week of Thanksgiving. They scheduled me for surgery on Black Friday. And the original plan was actually to admit me on Thanksgiving so that I was in the hospital and had priority over getting an open surgery spot. So ended up I didn't need to get admitted because someone had to cancel surgery, and I got their spot on Friday. So that happened. I went in. And it's one thing I'll always remember is that I'm sitting there scared out of my mind because, half of my penis, part of it's black and hard. And it was just sitting there, like, nervous and just really anxious about it. and Gottlieb was coming in to go over pre-op stuff, and I was like, well, I'm afraid I'm gonna wake up with half a penis, and he was like, yeah, that could happen, but we can fix it, and not dismissively, but like we can fix whatever happens. And that it made me feel better. The initial thought was that I wouldn't have to have significant amounts of tissue removed. Up until this point, no fevers, no aches, chills, whatever. It's doing fairly well, except for the dying penis that I had. And so they went in, ended up having to remove about half of my penis, and covered it with a split thickness graft and a wound vac. So when I woke up, I could see like the yellowish wound vac that they had, but I didn't see what my penis looked like right after that. I took it pretty hard. It was just bad. To have gone through surgery and then lose half of my penis was just not something that I wanted to go through. So, about 3 or 4 days later, they found out I had several very bad infections. I was put on several antibiotics. They had to use a special sulfur dressing on my penis. And I was on IV antibiotics, I believe, for 2 or 3 weeks. Like, I was discharged from the hospital with a PICC line. It was not fun. So about 3 or 4 days later, it was time to take the wound vac off, and I saw my penis for the first time and literally wanted to die. It was just bad. My arm looked better coming out of surgery than my penis did. That looked like something that would come out of The Walking Dead. Like, it looked like that half of my penis was a zombie dick. It was lumpy, misshapen. It was just bad. It was really bad. And so that was really rough. And ended up, some of the skin grafts didn't take, and so there was a lot of scarring. Between that and February-ish, I had a lot of bleeding, just random bleeding from different debris, like in-office debridements, because tissue is still kind of dying. So I had a lot of bleeding issues then too, and there's really nothing to do about it other than limit activity significantly. So in February, when I went back, by that time I had developed significant contracted scar tissue, which made my penis kind of curve in like that. I went from having about 5.5 inches in length, maybe a little bit more at that time, I don't know, to having about 3.5, if I just measured straight down. Made underwear a lot easier. For a little bit, I was like, how do people have all of these issues finding underwear? And then that's why. So had that happen, I went in for a post-op appointment in which I was told that the repair would be a significant surgery, that they planned on using my forearm to rebuild the right side of my penis and the urethra, because at the time, there was no way to know what was happening with my urethra, because of all the contracted scar tissue. The initial belief was that the scar tissue had eaten and killed and just kind of enveloped the urethra. So the initial thought was, we're going to use your forearm to rebuild everything. I was like, okay. A couple days later, I was like, I really don't feel comfortable with that. Thought about just redoing surgery. Emailed Gottlieb about what my options were for other donor sites. The kind of the agreement that was settled on was, if the complete urethra had to be rebuilt, using the arm would give it the best shot of working, just because of the blood flow. However, if it didn't need to be rebuilt, we could use different tissue. I think in the OR pre-op, Kind of the thought was to use maybe leg tissue to cover that, but that we, if it could be avoided, would not use my arm. Um, so the surgery ended up being about 8 hours for the repair. I had a buccal graft to fix a very large stricture, but my urethra had survived all of that, and so they took a skip flap. So I have an incision from my penis up through my hip, kind of towards my back. It stops about like halfway on my side, and that recovery from that was more significant in terms of mobility than my first one was. I was using a walker or cane for about 2 weeks post-op from that. And I felt really weird about my penis afterwards, because you had the left side that was forearm, a very visible like skin graft area, and then hip on the other side, and it was really girthy. I think waking up from surgery, it was probably about 10 inches in girth. It was pretty big, and from all the swelling and stuff, it was about 4 inches in length. So it looked pretty rough coming out of it. Just not something I'd prefer. So that happened. Time went on, it got a little longer, got less girthy, and it turned out that after the stricture repair, I had fistulas that popped up. So the thought was, let's see if they heal. So I had the catheter in a little longer, and it started to heal. I think I ended up having the catheter in for about 3 or 4 months, but it healed, and I was very happy about that. So eventually get the catheter removed, and I calcify, and all of those calcifications, when they would swap the catheters, would get minerals stuck in my bladder. So when I started peeing on my own, stones went into my urethra, ended up not being able to pee. I was actually in Philly when the stone issue hit full force, so I ended up having to go to the ER in Philly, which was just awful. It was abysmal. Went there, it was awful. Had to go back to Chicago when I got back. Had a cystoscopy. There were still stones. Had to have another surgery. I had gone under twice in the ER in Philly, and so when I went back about 2 weeks later or so, I had to have surgery again. After having an in-office cystoscopy. So that happens, and I'm able to pee for a little bit after that, and then a stricture developed. Couldn't pee. Had to go to the ER a week before I was having revisions, planned revisions, and have a catheter placed. Had the revisions. They dilated my urethra in the OR because they didn't want to postpone the surgery, but the urologist wasn't going to be able to go to the OR on Monday for a full urethroplasty. So they dilated it with the hope that it would last a couple months. I'm a very lucky person. It lasted about a month before it completely closed up. I had to go to the ER and have a suprapubic placed awake, which I do not recommend if you are able to avoid that. It's extremely painful, short-lived, but extremely painful. They gave me a shot of Dilaudid, local anesthesia. They did an ultrasound to make sure where they wanted to make the tract didn't have any intestine in front of it, and made a little incision and took this plastic stake-looking thing and jammed it into my abdomen. I screamed very loudly from that, and it was over, and then one of my friends picked me up from the ER. And then I had a stricture repair, the first stage of a stricture repair, about a month ago at this point, a little over a month ago. And so I had a hole at the base of my penis into my scrotum where I was peeing. That has closed up. I don't know how much of it is from an infection that I have, or how much of it is from from scar tissue. I don't know. I do have an appointment Should be on Friday. Still waiting to hear from the scheduler. Assuming I'll probably hear tomorrow because of the holidays. Um, so, uh, with all of that, um, kind of, this is horribly long, I'm sorry, but kind of a couple questions that I get or seem to hover around um, people who've had significant complications post phalloplasty. Do I regret phalloplasty? No. And it's something that I've thought a lot about, but in my situation, I knew I needed lower surgery. For my first stage of surgery, I had basically a meta. I don't think having a full scrotum would have impacted me so much, but it was the only option. I still felt really uncomfortable after my first stage, still couldn't just go to the gym and feel fine in the locker room. And for me, that was very important post-op, was just to be able to live and feel normal. Um, and that couldn't happen with me if I just had meta. So I don't regret that. Do I regret my surgeon choice? Absolutely not. With what I had, I could have lost my entire penis. With Chen and Crane, the way that they do the consults, I would have only talked to the urologist, the urology part of that. My biggest complications, the scary complications that I had, were all issues regarding the plastic surgery side of it. So for me, having that trust in that, going in, not knowing what hell of a repair or what I'm going to wake up with, um, I had to have a lot of trust there, and I had that with him. I never doubted at one moment that he wanted to just do something regardless of how I felt about it. So I don't regret my surgeon choice. The two surgeons that always get thrown out whenever I say I had complications and did not go to Crane or Chen is that I should have gone there. I have no regrets. I want to go to Crane for complications, especially as someone who is prone to infection and also has several allergies to antibiotics. I would not be comfortable with the care and kind of his attitude towards things, because my body doesn't give a whole lot of signs when things are wrong. They have to be paid attention to very closely. So that, and then with Dr. Chen, I think he's a great surgeon. He's a urologist. That's who I built the trust with, and for urology fixes, that would be great, but I wouldn't have had that trust in the micro team that I had, having had, I think, 5 or 6 appointments with Gottlieb before I had surgery. So I don't regret my surgeon choice. These are complications that would have happened anywhere. There are things I didn't know going into surgery. I didn't know that clotting would be an issue. I've had about 6 other surgeries before I had that one. Never had a clotting issue. There was nothing to be said about that. When it comes to clotting and when it comes to phalloplasty, those complications are there. They can happen. They might be rare, but something that was said to me that I think is very important to think about pre-op is that it doesn't matter if a complication has a 3% chance of happening, a 1% chance of happening, a 0.5% chance of happening. That complication can happen. It's something to be prepared for. It's something to keep in mind. When you have phalloplasty, going into it, you can lose your penis, you can lose half of your penis, you can lose none of your penis. You could have small amounts of necrosis, you could have no necrosis. It's just something to keep in mind. And I don't say that to try to scare anyone away from surgery. It's just something that I wish I had just thought about more, or the possibility of happening. It's something I think I put to the back of my mind because it's easier with all of the stress of planning surgery and how I had to switch insurance things last minute. It was much easier to think about, I'm a healthy 22-year-old, that can't happen to me, than it was, what do I do if this happens? How am I going to feel if this happens? It's not something I think I could ever fully comprehend pre-op, but it is something I wish I thought about. The only regret I really have about lower surgery is using my forearm. Forearm phalloplasty gets touted as the gold standard of phalloplasty, the best donor site to use, whatever. And that kind of sentiment really depends on what you're looking for, what surgeons you want to go for. and what your priorities are. So I wanted a big penis. I wanted a hidden donor site. How did I end up at RFF? I think I took a lot of those pressures and just numbers too seriously, and I don't think I should have. If I was going to go for it again, or if I had to redo it, hope not. I would either go with MLD or an ab flap phalloplasty. Nerve grafting is possible, and so even insensate flaps can be innervated. I would do that. I would not go with RFF again. Size, overall, I'm pretty happy. I wish it was a little longer, and maybe a little less girthy. It's not something I would ever change, though. I think ideally 7x6 would be perfect, seeing how things are now. But that's about it. In terms of future surgeries, I will know Friday about my urethra and how many stages it's going to take to try to fix that, or what even the problem is. I'm really hoping it's inflammation. Really hoping it's just inflammation. But usually, with how things have gone, UTIs are a symptom of something going wrong. Now, this is a little different because I've had a catheter in. I'm very prone to infections with them in. But I will have that. And after whatever urethra stuff happens, I will have tissue expanders in my scrotum, and then I will have the scrotal implants and the erectile device. As much as I would love to get the rod, there's a lot of surgeons saying, or people who've been advised, if you're in contact sports or where you're going to take a lot of hits, to go with the pump over the rod. At the end of the day, it's an individual choice. There are also surgeons who say it doesn't make a difference. But I would go with the pump. I don't want to lose anything else to surgery. And as much as going under multiple times with the risk of infection scares the hell out of me, I don't want to give up hobbies for surgery. So yeah, that's about it. I apologize for having something so long. I hope to make other updates in the future. They may be few and far between. I'm really hoping they are, because that would mean things are going fairly smoothly. But yeah, that's about it. I'll catch you all later. Bye.